So can you just briefly explain to us sort of what the difference is between like asset creation and compliance,
Sure.
and what does a board look like to you that's sort of been used as an asset to create value?
Sure. And in fact, what the way I'm going to respond to that question, you're probably going to hear that over and over and over. There's a central theme that runs through everything, and I
Yeah.
think it's worth pointing that out. But it's also important because that central theme is what sets really a really high performing board apart. So the 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 criticism, primarily public company boards, and my focus is on the U.S., but it's applicable to the U.K. It's applicable to most of Europe. Yeah, some of Europe's got those two-tiered kind of boards, but there's also, for the most part, with public company boards, there is a compliance risk avoidance um, process, consensus, lets everybody get along. We are way up here on above the company's operations, and we have this oversight authority, but there's no real clear governing objective. It's just simply a body that follows all kind of processes and procedures. A, a board that is fully developed as an asset has one simple criteria. It has a governing objective of developing the full potential of the company. Full stop. It's like, think about the power that's in that, though. If you're a part of a body, the board, and it has that objective sets the stage for everything else. That's why I say this is going to be repeated throughout, I'm sure,
Mhm.
our discussion,
Mhm.
because the governing objective is the linchpin. Without the governing objective, private equity, although private equity partners, managing directors, they don't go around saying, "Well, our boards have this objective." In effect, they do have that objective. They're in the business of maximizing the value of the equity during the whole period. So therefore, their governance model, which
Mhm.
has shown in every study that's ever been done on it, far superior from a value creation standpoint to public boards. Their boards have the governing objective of maximizing the value of the equity investment in that business during the whole period and positioning the company for further value creation and exit. So it's
D Does it come down to is it a risk appetite thing then? Is it because PE have to move fast? Is their risk appetite a little bit better so they're not as focused on losing, I don't know what it is, losing their jobs maybe, or losing shareholder value, or what? Why
yeah,
does some
that's an interesting question because the investors in, especially with the larger funds, but in pretty much across the board, the investors in the PE funds are the same investors that are investing in the institutional
yeah.
investors that are in the public market. So it's kind of strange that you have the same kind of shareholder base of sorts, close
Mhm.
enough. The difference is that nobody's bothered to sit around and think about the public company model. It's morphed over time. And in the U.S., I can't speak as much to the UK, although I know that there was something that was done in the '90s with setting apart the first corporate governance code. In the U.S., what made the one huge change was the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. There were a small handful of companies, yeah, Enron, uh,
Mhm.
WorldCom, and several others that had been caught with all at the same, roughly the same time, with some kind of fraudulent behavior, something that did damage shareholders. So Congress, in its infinite wisdom, does a pendulum swing and goes all the way to the opposite direction, creates this bill that creates this enormous regulatory requirement on the top of public company boards. That's the compliance issue. That's where they become such compliance oriented entities. Uh,
Mhm.
that was the beginning, but since that point, you've had a series of things that's been laid on top of public company boards that's not on private equity boards, that takes them away from thinking in terms of focusing on the business. So you've got a model, a public company governance model that's developed without really conscious thought to it, where private equity has developed, in fact, developed pretty quickly when it moved from the LBO shops of the '80s into a more sophisticated form of asset in the '90s. They they created, without anybody's outside interference, they created their model. They had to
Mm.
have that model to maximize their
To
value.
succeed.
That's what they're all about. Public
So
companies are
is
about all kind of other things.
It's almost like compliance first, performance second. Then
It's
is
more
what you're
like
saying,
compliance first, performance 23rd.
right? Okay.
I'm
but
exaggerating.
like, but like you say, I mean,
And the
you know,
performance is more quarterly for public companies to the degree that they're focusing on it. It's more that we've got to hit those quarterly numbers, and the quarterly numbers. That's fine to have that kind of focus. You got to have that kind of focus to hit the long term. The problem there is that their focus is primarily just on that shorter term focus, and if they have they may have a strategic plan, but it'll be an aspirational plan. It will not be a value creation plan that's fully committed to like private equity has.
hmm
And by the way, I want to make one point that I think will help your listeners here. I don't want to overemphasize private equity, but it is the genesis of a lot of the ideas here. What I'm talking about as far as that kind of model with some resource, maybe limitations depending on the situation, it is applicable to non-private equity companies. It's applicable to smaller companies. I've
yeah,
implemented a model like this in a company with 3.5 million in sales. So it's applicable, even though it may not sound like on the surface. So hopefully that'll help people think about this thing, that I'm not restricting this simply to private
yeah,
equity.
yeah, yeah.
That's not my intent.
So I guess the next question logically is what makes a good governance model versus a bad governance model that these big public, PLCs are following? Why are private equity and those people more successful on a sort of shorter time frame and a sort of cash on cash return type thing, metric versus the bigger companies? What makes a good model
Well,
in
I
your
mean, we're
opinion?
back to the answer is very simple. It's the quality of the model is directly proportional to the quality of the governing objective. If you've got a governing objective and you can say that governing objective a lot of different ways. It's simpler to say develop the potential of the company. More
Mm,
specifically, it's optimize capital allocation and maximize operating performance and shareholder value over some chosen period. And that regardless of whether you're a private equity or a public company. But what makes the model superior is the quality of the governing objective. Again, this is a critical point. That governing objective, and I'll just mention this very quickly because I'm sure we'll probably
hmm
touch on more of it later. It
Yeah.
sets the context for everything else. The kinds of directors, what the board does, what it spends most of its time on, the type of information it receives, ad infinitum. It's the kind. It creates that context, which makes it much easier to put the pieces in place when you have the context. If you don't have the context at the public company level, then you can put better people. In fact, a lot of the people on public company boards are are pro, excellent executives. Some who really understand the value creation process, but they're functioning in a model that is not conducive to it. So
Okay, so let's take a step back then a bit further. How do what is the genesis of this governance model, and who decides it, and what it looked like? I mean, essentially, we're talking almost like a business plan here, aren't we?
yeah, I
In its
mean, and
kind of
yeah,
rawest
it
terms.
ultimately the model will, yes, the ultimately when you have the model directed properly, your end result, I mean,
Yes.
you're going to end up, if you do all the pieces properly, the company will end up just like the best private equity firms do. It'll end up with a value creation plan that is kind of embedded within the whole governance structure. So it's going to depend on if I understand the question right, is how do you, if you have a company, you got to have a company first. Who is it that's going to decide to have this kind of governance model or to have a governance model at all? And that's the answer is that depends on the situation. In a privately held company where there's a single owner, the single owner is going to decide because they're the
Yeah.
shareholder is going to decide what they do as far as the board. And they may have no board. They may have a weak board. They may have a great uh, value creation directed board in a
hmm
and this is where this thing gets really interesting, and it probably is the most valuable in non-private equity companies is when you have a company that has excuse me, multiple shareholders. Then it ends up having to be a collective effort of those shareholders, and I'm talking about companies now where I'm not talking about, where there are 50 different shareholders, but where there might be two, three, four, five, or six different families or individuals or a combination
Mhm.
thereof that own a
Mhm.
company. Somebody's going to have to step forward and lead it. And I've been involved in I'd have to stop and think about it and count it, but it's multiple situations like that where I've stepped in the middle of that kind of situation. You have multiple shareholders, companies starting to decline. Uh,
Yeah.
they throw up their hands. They don't know what to do with it, and taking kind of a leadership role to put together the board and quantify what the board does, what the owners do, what management does, et cetera. But somebody's got to initiate it, and like I say, it's going to depend on the situation as far as who initiates it. In the public arena,
Mhm.
who it typically is that moves a board in that direction, at least, is an activist investor, and it's the better activist investors that do it. The run of the mill ones aren't very good at it. The over in Europe, Sevian is extremely good at it. In the United States, Elliott, Starboard,
Yeah.
Value
Yeah.
Act are all of those are very good at the whole governance aspect of it, and knowing what's needed to maximize the value of the company. They're not in there for a quick hit and run away.
Yeah. You talked there about capital allocation, and why is that, in sort of layman's terms, why is that more of a board's job than just the CEO's job?
I it's the board and the CEO's job. Most companies you find, and in fact, most companies, both the CEO and the board are lacking in capital allocation skills. But when I've referenced as far as it being, optimizing capital allocation comes out of this better governance model, it means that you have on the board people who understand how to evaluate investment opportunities, how to assess them, how to require that they're presented in a certain manner, the whole ball of wax. So you have the best odds of being able to make the right investments. Sure, management is going to be surfacing most of those, but none of it should be big surprises if there's a value maximization plan in place, because the context again for the capital is spending is there from the value maximization plan. But regardless, you want people on the board who understand. Not everybody has to have these skills, but you certainly want people on the board who have the understanding of how to evaluate it, more of an investor mindset than an
Mm,
operator's mindset.
yeah.
You see
And
that with
and d
holding companies. Classic how not to do it was General Electric when they first appointed Jeff Immelt as the CEO, sales guy, the big diversified industrial company. And on their
Mhm.
board, their 18-member board, out of those 18 members, only one individual had capital allocation skills. Well, in the holding company, that is the skill. It's not
Yeah.
operating, it's not selling, it's whatever. So I'm only making a point there that that was a poster child for how really not to do it. And you saw what happened. GE imploded.
I'm trying to get my head around this board situation and put it in the context of not just smaller companies, but kind of primary private equity as well. But let's go back to like the role of the board. Like, what are the kind of high level 3 to 5 things that a board should be doing, and where are they wasting their time? Obviously, boards perform differently. Most board meetings are what, once a month or once a quarter, and probably not even every month or every
It depends.
quarter.
Every other month, once a month, every quarter. Most of the ones that I've been involved in, unless the company was in dire straits, were once a quarter. So,
So
but
we're
it goes.
only it's very light touch, and we're quite infrequent with meeting, and particularly when you've got 18 heads of I guess there's going to be lots of egos and stuff in that room. So how do you make the most out of that board, and make sure that they are doing the things that they should be doing? But what are those things that they should be doing is I guess the
Well,
first part of the
now
question.
we're back to the governance model again. So the things they should be doing, if they're going to perform at the highest level, then they've got a model that has that governing objective of maximizing the value of the company over the holding period. And let's just use 5 years. That's a
Hmm.
typical, whether it's a public company, activist comes into a public company, and does real well with getting the board to understand things, they're typically going to be looking to 5, 7 years. Same way with private equity, 3, 5, 7 years, some kind of time frame. So when I talk about the time frame, I'll just use 5 years for simplicity. So
Yeah.
the board the board is going to have it. They've got to start with the governance models, got to be right. And if the governance model is right, then what their primary role then becomes is ensuring, number one, that full potential is defined. And think about that for a minute. You got to define. You can't make it up. If a company's doing 10 million in sales, and you say, okay, I'd like this company to get in 5 years. I'd like for it to get to 20 million. Based on what? I mean, maybe you get there, maybe you don't. So the first thing the board needs to ensure is there is the right analysis of whatever is done to define what that full potential looks like. And if it's done right, the way private equity does it, an actual due diligence, a deep dive due diligence process will be done with the intent. It's not defined just risk factors. It's primarily done to find what are the levers we can pull in this company over a 5-year period that will maximize its value. And if it's done right, what you end up walking away from that process is, one, the ability to set a 5-year equity target, the value of the shares, the
Yeah.
ability to set a 5-year EBITDA target, and the ability to identify 3 to 5 maximum value driving initiatives that are geared towards taking the company over the 5-year period towards that exit target. And that's, the best private equity firms always start with the exit first. Exit comes first. They don't start with the present, they start with the exit. Then everything gets backed into it and the plan's geared to move it forward. So that's the first thing they do if they're doing well. The second thing they do, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but it's absolutely critical, is they ensure that a more detailed value creation plan is developed that will show how those initiatives are going to be implemented, and they will ensure that there is an absolute owner for each initiative, the single person accountable for each. And then the last thing they're going to do is the monitoring of the progress towards the realization of the milestones, the targets of the initiatives, with that ultimate 5-year target always in mind. And as a part of that, there'll be sort of an ongoing diligence-like process that surfaces the information where things have changed, whether there's things internally, externally, competition, or whatever, because that value creation plan is not going to be as far as the how to get to the target. It's probably going to change
Mm.
on multiple occasions over that 5-year period. So the board has to have a mechanism to be informed, and management, yeah, is a part of that. But it's if they can have some kind of process that looks like on, say, every some chosen period where they go back out in the marketplace and kind of do the analysis and get some, really quantitative and qualitative feedback to the board. That way, you've got the board fully informed in the context of moving towards the 5-year target.
Yeah. So we're starting with the end in mind. It's you talk about potential, but it's really a very specific goal that you're setting, or the board is setting, and then you're thinking about the kind of loose framework to achieve that target, and then we're course correcting every time the board meets, once a month, once a quarter, whatever it might be, to see what external factors and internal factors are kind of affecting that, and do we need to go off and do this, or do we need to slightly change the plan? But you've kind of got that North Star constantly driving towards that
Absolutely.
North
And
Star.
one thing that, one part of this that sounds so simple, and it's where the whole process typically breaks down. I mean, there are a lot of steps where it could break down, but the thing I think on a most regular basis that causes it to break down is that monitoring part of it. It sounds so simple, the board gets, assuming that they're getting adequate, formatted, and timely reports that shows where things are. The question is, how are they interacting with management? Are they listening to the report, sort of peripherally or perfunctorily asking questions, or are they really challenging them? Are they pushing them up against the wall properly, not, you know, putting pressure on them to test things, because if the operating discipline is not there, meaning the monitoring of that plan and the fact that that management is executing, and they're executing with urgency, they're executing with precision. If that part of it falls down, the rest of it will lag. And I've seen this, whether it's at the management level or it's at the board level, when those kind of plans are in place and you've got things that you can track and you've got weekly or daily information coming in that you're able to track, it always breaks down when there is a lessening of the discipline. So it's almost impossible for me to emphasize how critical that discipline is in managing the plan. It's not an adversarial function. If it's an adversarial function, then something's wrong. The board needs to really take a strong
Yeah.
look at management. It's simply a function where the board is fully engaged. They're fully committed. They're not going through the motions like so many boards do. They're literally have that, and it's consistent. It's every time a report comes out, whatever it is. Again, most boards, when you have this kind of model, most boards are getting reports. I know with every board that I've been involved with, that I've either chaired or been on for the last 20 years, we have gotten weekly reports, monthly reports, and then the quarterly board package, if it's quarterly, or every other month package. So the information flow is not just for the board meeting. If the board is really wanting to stay on top of things, then in this model they need to.
And what should boards stay out of? What should they not be doing? And how do you as the chairman or the CEO make sure that they're not, you were quite specific there about, the boards aren't operators. They should be good investors of allocators of capital and good investors.
Some
But
should be.
yeah, sorry, yes, some should. So what are the things that when do boards get it wrong? What kind of jobs or tasks or ways of thinking about things are they doing, which means that they're on the wrong track?
Sure. Two things. I mean, they're probably more than two, but two main. One, and this is typical for just about any kind of board, is they cross the line into management, and where they attempt to function in a manner similar to management, they're actually doing some form of execution that they have no business doing. Now, there's some exceptions to that. Some private equity boards actually have people on the board who are involved in some aspect of the business, and they've been put on the board for that reason. They're not there to usurp management. They're there to assist, but they do take a fairly active role. Setting that aside,
Mm.
stepping across the line and functioning actually as a manager. For example, going and meeting with people in the company without advising the CEO that they're going to do it. They don't need the CEO's permission, but they need the courtesy of letting the CEO know, I'd like to sit down with this group of people and talk with them, because that's one of the ways boards learn also, is getting feedback like that. So anything where they cross the line into management, that's one. Number two is just the opposite, is go back to the points I was making regarding the execution discipline, where the board starts backing off of that. They start getting just a little bit complacent, and the drift sets in, and drift can set in so invisibly until all of a sudden somebody wakes up and realizes, geez, we're so far off from where we said we were going to be, but it's been incremental. It's not been,
Yeah.
nobody's observed it during the process. So either the lack of vigilance or the crossing the line.
What you're talking about there essentially is that the board are undermining the management by going below them and speaking to the team or the staff directly and undercutting the management.
If they don't do it, if they do it without permission, yes. To
Yeah,
to
sorry,
do it
yeah.
with permission, that's most really good boards do that now. Their directors will go, they may visit customers, they may visit employees or suppliers. They're doing it simply to gather information. They're not doing it in a management capacity, and sometimes they're able to give feedback to management that management wasn't aware of, not because they're slack. It's just because people maybe communicated a little bit different. When they do it and they cross the line and they go visit with somebody and the CEO finds out about it after the fact, or somebody else in management that's senior finds out it, or if they start taking on an actual management role where they start picking up the phone and saying, you got to say a subordinate of the CEO, you got a problem here, and we think you need to correct it by doing this, that, and the other. And
Mm,
the CEO is not involved in that discussion, that type of thing where they cross the line. Even with this kind of board, which is a much more engaged board, they are engaged or should be engaged
mm.
in the interaction with the CEO and the senior leadership team in the board meetings or other organized venues rather than trying to do management's job for them.
Talk a little bit more about the drift that you mentioned there, if you can. How does that happen? How do you spot it? How do you ensure that it doesn't happen in the future?
I think the simplest way that it happens is that there's no one on the board who really gets that part of it. Uh, some people get this thing of discipline, some people don't. Uh, a lot of really good non-executive chairmen in boards like this. That's one of the things that they're paying the most attention to. They're the type of person, if you really get a good one, they're the type of person who does get it. And actually, they may not even be brilliant business people per se, but they are excellent at understanding the dynamics of the whole, for lack of better description, discipline, execution discipline process, and being aware of when the board as a whole is starting to get slack on it. So the way you
Hmm.
stop it is never let it get started in the first place by having somebody on that board who has a track record of doing that kind of thing. I mean, I'm not saying that's easy to find, and it's not that everybody has those skills. That's the way it works best. A lot of people who are in, just by their very natures, people who are engaged in private equity have those kind of skills. Some don't, but a lot do, in addition to other
Mm,
skills. So, and once it's started, I mean, somebody's got to identify it. Whether it's just getting started or it's been drifting for months, and the end result is now really some major shortfalls to milestones in the value creation plan. Somebody's got to call it out. Somebody's got to make the point of it, and if they have to make it more than one time, and they have to drill it into everybody's head, sometimes these kinds of boards get a bit heated,
hmm.
and it has to be done. Preferably is not letting it drift to begin with, because once it's drifted, then the process, the energy that it takes to get it back on schedule is
Yeah.
is pretty enormous.
This is the kind of concept of the aggregation of marginal losses, isn't it? Like it's just that build up of very small things over time causing big problems. And I suppose then a good board would, I guess the characteristics of individuals of good board members is that they're open to being challenged and maybe hearing some things that they don't want to hear because someone's got a whistleblow, right? Someone's got to put their hand up and say, guys, we're losing our way here, losing our
Absolutely. Yeah.
course. And,
Yeah.
it's a good board is going to recognize that. And everyone's going to go, yeah, you're totally right. Let's get back on it.
I tell
And
you,
the likes of,
this may sound a little bit too idealistic, but I mean, yeah, I think you're hitting on something that's really important. Is a good board is not going to have politics. A good board's not going to give a crap about optics for optics' sake. Their
does
focus
that
is going to
exist
be
though?
their focus is going to be one thing, and that's maximizing the value. Uh,
Does that exist? Can that exist? Or are we talking about egos at this level that don't allow that? Is that
Yeah,
idealistic or
it can it
is
can
it
it
common?
can exist. I think that what makes it easier to exist is when everyone is operating off the same incentive. And I don't believe that
Yeah.
people have to have a big monetary incentive to function well as in this kind of board framework. But in a perfect world, and this is one reason that makes private equity, it's not the only thing that makes private equity work. The incentives obviously are a big part of it, the carry that the partners are able to get. But a lot of the people on the board are not going to get the carry. They may have some upside in restricted shares or that type of thing, but they're not going to get the carry like the people who are part of the private equity firm. But the more that they can be focused on what matters, which is the business, as opposed to all the peripheral issues, then the less you're going to have anything that breaks down. And if somebody challenges somebody, they're challenging them because of something that's happening that's going to cause a shortfall in the plan, and everybody, hopefully, in a perfect world, is committed to the plan. I
Yeah.
I've been on boards where it works like that. I've been on private equity boards. I've chaired boards outside of private equity where it's worked like that. I've been on boards where it didn't work like that. Uh,
Moving on to the actual kind of personalities and the people of a board. I guess this is a two-part question, really. What makes a good board member, and how do you build a board? Like, how do you how do you decide the seats to fill, and what characteristics are useful to each of those seats?
excellent question. And this is where we started off talking about the difference between the compliance kind of board and the board that is actually functioning as a full asset of the company. This is one part of it that's very critical. Let's talk about how you fill the seats before we talk about the type of person.
Yeah,
Because to me, the filling of the seats, I'm probably a lot contrary here. To me, the filling of the seats is a lot more important than not the character of the person, but the personality characteristics and all of that stuff. I'm more interested in the expertise than I am in the everybody getting along. Uh,
really.
we'll come back to that. Okay. So, uh, Again, go back. You have a context for who you select in
Yeah,
general, and at least there should be at least three different types of board members for a board that is functioning with the governing objective of developing the full potential. One should be, and in privately held companies where you got an owner that's been there for 20 years, that owner may feel what I'm getting ready to say. They may not. It just depends. They may want somebody else. But industry and recent industry experience, and I cannot emphasize this more, track record. And track record here means they have accomplished something. They have created some value. They've built something. They've taken an operation in that industry and they've done something to make it perform higher, more valuable. They know what's involved in it. So industry is critical. Okay, the second type of person that you need on the board is tied to the value creation plan. There's going to typically be one, maybe more major initiatives that are really key to making this company work. And the kind of director, you may want to have one, it depends on how many of the initiatives are like that. But you want to have at least one, if not more, individuals also with experience and track record that's related to that particular initiative. And I'll give you an example of this. When we bought Arctic Glacier, one of the probably the single biggest impact from initiative wise, and it was a big picture initiative with a lot of smaller ones, had to do with efficiency and cost reduction. And within that framework, the distribution system was where we identified the largest opportunity. But as far as the management we were putting in place, they had manufacturing experience, but they did not have direct store delivery distribution experience. So we selected a board member. We found a board member that had, with two larger companies, had completely rebuilt underperforming direct store delivery distribution systems. We asked them to be on the board, and they were invaluable in the input in how you take big, complex systems like this across multiple locations and turn them upside down and make them as efficient as possible with a combination of technology and non-technology approaches to it. In other words, we had the specific expertise on the board relative to a major value creation initiative. That's a second criteria and you might have in a more complex company, you might have not just an individual like that, but there might be another big picture initiative where you, in effect, do the same type of thing. If it hadn't been private equity and with also my experience with acquisitions, it's possible we'd have had an acquisition person or a roll-up person on the board
yeah,
had there
yeah,
not
yeah.
been that. But that was more than covered. So That's the second criteria. The third one, this is harder to do, especially in a smaller private business, but it's still, I'll throw it out there because it's pretty essential to the model, is an individual, at least one individual or more, who have what I've referred to as general value creation experience and track record. Typically, you find those people in private equity firms. That's the business they're in. They're in the business of value creation. Most of them have experience across a wide array of industries, wide sectors. They bring a completely different type of mindset, expertise than corporate executives or other operating executives do. It's a huge piece for a board if you can get somebody like that. There's CFOs who have that kind of ability. There's certain entrepreneurs that have that kind of ability. So that's the core of it. To really make this board work. I mean, think about it like a sports team. You're going out, you got these different positions you got to fill. You're going to go try to find the best person, absolute best person you can find to put into this position or that position, because you've got your value creation plan that's analogous to going to the Super Bowl or winning the World Cup or whatever. You want
Hmm.
absolute best players relative to what that plan is. So that thinking is, to me, what should be primary. Obviously, you don't want people of weak character. You don't want people who are crooks. I mean, that should go without saying. But in my view, if you've got somebody who's a bit difficult to deal with, who's cantankerous, and under normal conditions, you would think that person doesn't really fit in with our board. I'd rather have that person if they've got the skills and they've got the ability to add to the realization of the value creation plan than some other individual who might be easier to get along with, but doesn't
Hmm.
contribute as much. So that's just,
That's okay. So there's a couple of takeaways there from my side. So you're trying to identify people that solve a very specific problem within this framework that we talked about earlier. Um, and I guess that kind of answers the question of, how many seats do you know you need to fill, is how many specific problems do you have to solve. But it's interesting that and I totally understand what you're saying, experience and credibility and skill set overrides the kind of cultural piece. Um,
I think it
what
does. Like
point,
that,
what
I
point,
get quite a bit of disagreement on that.
yeah, I can imagine, because there's got to be a level, right? There's got to be a point where, yes, you've got high achievers and high operators, but they're all arseholes, for want of a better word, and they can't get along. So the board doesn't work and doesn't gel as a result of
That's where
that.
you need it. That's where you need a good chairman to jerk a knot in their head.
I was just going to say, does a
No,
good
I mean,
chairman
you're
solve
right. I
that
mean,
problem?
if it's extreme, the person is an asshole to the extreme. No, you don't want them. But someone who might otherwise not quite fit within, and use the word, the quote, the culture or whatever,
Mm.
and they're a little bit, but they've got that expertise. I mean, I'd take them any day. All
So
of it.
let's
Go
let
back to the governing objective. Everything is committed, is tied
yeah.
to the governing objective. It's a world class sports team.
Mhm.
Everything's attached to winning the World Cup. It's attached to winning the Rugby World Cup or whatever,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
the
yeah.
Super Bowl. This is
It
playing
starts
at
with the
a
end in
higher level.
mind. And so going back to, you mentioned earlier a company that was doing sort of 3 million in sales. I mean, they're not going to have a full sort of 12-person board. So for people listening to this that are kind of resource constrained operators, how should they think about advisory positions and board members? What kind of advice have you got for those kind of people?
For one, I don't think anybody needs a 12-member board. I think that's too big, even for
Hmm.
public companies.
Yeah.
Even for public companies. Yeah,
Well, look at
Starboard
yeah,
replaced
look
the
at
whole
Ford.
board of Darden, 12 members, but that was because they already had 12 members. The better number for a smaller privately held company is seven. Probably is the best number. Seven total. Uh, five is not bad if you can get, depending on who the people are that are the insiders versus the outsiders.
Hmm.
Uh, Nine, I would say nine is absolute maximum. I wouldn't go over nine. I try not to go over seven. So, from a number standpoint, you don't need a big board. You
Hmm.
need, I mean, now I'm going to make it more general. What you need is people who are value creators and are committed who can help move that needle. I mean, that's really the bottom line, because that's what this particular board type is about moving the needle. It's not
Yeah.
about just risk avoidance. Sure, that's a function. That doesn't go away. It just doesn't become the end all be all of it. So board size 5, maximum, absolutely maximum 9. In the company that I referenced, we had here's how this worked. Maybe this will help too with understanding how things at least can work in a multi shareholder. We had
Mhm.
3 shareholder groups in this company. We had a majority shareholder that owned over 50%, another shareholder who owned 30 some odd percent, and another shareholder who owned 10%. The uh, shareholder who owned the majority got 3 board members, including himself, 2 others. The one who owned the 30 some odd percent got 2 board members, him and 1 other. And then the one who owned 10% got 1 board member. They could obviously be that person. So
Mhm.
that was how we structured that. And the most valuable board member that was selected for that board was just like what was done for the company where we brought the guy in with the extensive DSD track record. This
Yeah.
was different. This was manufacturing as opposed to some other function. But that was where 2 things with that company. One, the plants were very, very old, and we'd run the numbers on it. It made absolutely no sense to build a new plant or new plants. The return just wasn't there. So what was critical to hitting our 5-year EBITDA target was the absolute maximum efficiency out of these ancient plants and ensuring
Mhm.
that they didn't fall apart and break down. The person we
Mhm.
put on the board probably had more expertise than anybody that I'm aware of in understanding how these plants worked and what was necessary from an engineering standpoint to have on the
Yeah.
ground. Again, huge, huge value. But he didn't function in management. It was at the board level and then sitting down periodically with the CEO or some of the other engineering personnel, helping with analysis when we did look at building a plant. Very valuable. But again, small business. And interesting with that business, it worked really well. The business was just stuck. It at one point been a high flyer. It was underperforming. EBITDA had fallen to it was almost in the negative numbers. And it wasn't any magic. Nobody was a genius here. It's how powerful, if you put this in properly, you know, we got that deep dive due diligence got done. We set the target, and here's an interesting part of this too. About halfway through, we hit a major snag. We had one of the plants. I told you the plants were risky.
Mm.
Even regardless of this guy's help, major repairs ended up having to be done, huge capital spending, huge borrowing that was unanticipated in our 5-year model. And so I
Mhm.
remember clearly board members saying, "Look, we've had to go through this. We've incurred this additional debt. Don't you think we need to lower the equity target a little bit? Because now probably at exit, we're going to have more
It's
debt.
debt
It's
to pay
going to
back.
make it harder for that equity target unless we get the multiple through the roof." And my contention was, no, we're going to stay committed to it. I was the chairman, but I didn't have the authority to make the decision. That was just my perspective, and they went along with it. We stayed committed to it. We had to replace about the same time we had to replace the CEO. We picked the wrong one to begin with, and at the end of the 5-year period, we hit the target. Um, it goes back to, and this is what I think is maybe one of the most difficult things for people to understand, especially when it's board stuff, is that this model is a fully committed model. It's not
Mm.
aspirational. It's committed. If it works, that's the way it's designed. That's the way the top private equity firms work. It's fully
Yeah.
committed.
On that CEO point, it leads us nicely into accountability. Who holds the board to account, and who does the board hold to account? And kind of where does it break down if it breaks down?
If it breaks down, I mean, some of it's going to depend again on the type of the organization. Uh, in a privately held company, again, where you have multiple shareholders, and this is apply if you only have one shareholder, it's the shareholders that hold the board to account. and the board holds the management to account. The way you make that work, though, is you need to have clearly defined authorities for management. This is management's uh, bailiwick within this framework to this, including how much they can spend from a capital standpoint without getting board approval. This management functions within all these frameworks without needing to engage the board. Then you got the second thing with the board, you got the same written descriptions of what the board is responsible for. They don't have to run to the shareholders to do this, and this. And then finally, you have the things that only the shareholders can do. And typically, those things are one, incur debt at a certain level. Two, sell the company.
Mm.
Three, make a major acquisition above a certain size. And four, change the business of the company or add
Yeah.
a major line that pretty much changes it. When you have everything spelled out like that, it's crystal clear, and you got to get everybody to agree with it up front when you're putting all this in place. Then when you run into a situation where there could be pretty serious argument, you've got the documents to fall back on, and everything is taken care of from that standpoint.
Again, so it's very structured, and all of this is probably in place from the start. So it's almost like a playbook. You mentioned the sports team analogy earlier. This is your kind of playbook, and this is these are the plays you can make, and plays outside the playbook, you've got to come back to the shareholders and ask for permission.
Yeah, I think you're making a really good point, but I think your point may be actually a larger one than what you're focusing on, and maybe you're focusing on the larger part. The whole thing, this model, in my view, I've not ever heard anybody else say this, but in my view, this whole model is a playbook. Because it's structured. And it's so clear the things that have to be in place for it to work well. None of them are that difficult. They are actually a fairly simple phenomenon. The thing that's probably the most trying or most difficult for a privately held company would be if they're starting off and they want to put in a model like this, that doing the same level of due diligence that a private equity firm does, that may be the challenge, because private equity typically has large staff, plus they'll engage, depending on the business they're looking at, they'll engage 1, 2 different types of consultants, and they really get down into the weeds. A person who knows an industry well can do this and provide this quote level of service. It may not be as professional, it may not be quite as deep, but it's to the degree that it can be done is absolutely an essential part of the quote playbook. But the whole thing is like a playbook. It gets very depending on single shareholder, multiple shareholders, private equity, trying to implement it into a public company. Depends on the arena, but the playbook, its general strokes pretty much stay the same.
This might be a bit simplistic, but can you walk us through a board meeting? A typical board meeting of a high performing company. What's kind of on the agenda? What gets discussed? What reports are crucial? Talk us through it.
I can not only walk you through it, I'll show it to you.
Oh, amazing.
And I didn't know whether that you had this question. I thought it would be a logical one because it's probably not going to be what people think it is.
Okay.
I'll show it, and then I'll go through it. I mean, this is an actual agenda. 3 years into a particular company, and this
what size? Give us a bit of context into the business if you can share that.
About
what
400
kind of
million
size was
revenue.
it? Right. Okay.
400 million.
And is the agenda the agenda's that broad strokes? It's like 5 or 6 points to discuss, and each one will take an hour or 45 minutes, whatever it takes.
It's pretty simple board meeting. Though is kind of the point. So let me run through what's there though.
Yep.
First thing is the CEO gives his or her, and I'm going to speak generically. For the CEO gives their perspective on the business, sort of high level overview since when he did it last, whether it was a month ago, quarter ago, or whatever. It's a general summary of where things stand, the things that that the CEO is thinking about, et cetera. And that sets the stage for everything. The rest of the meeting, with a couple of exceptions that I'll touch on, the rest of the meeting has to do with the initiatives. That's what's on the agenda. In
Yeah.
this particular case, the first item on the agenda, sales and marketing update. And the owner of that initiative makes that presentation. The second one is the OpEx update, operational excellence. That's where the big picture, we had this big picture target that during the ownership period, we're going to take X million in cost out of that business, mostly through improving efficiency, some
Hmm.
through stupid things that previous management had done where there was just too much head count at headquarters, that kind of thing. But most of it is really just doing the business different, an efficiency standpoint. So the owner of that initiative, the vice president of operational excellence, he makes that presentation. And the data is there, all of that. And with each one of these, it's not just them making the presentation. This gets back to what I was talking about earlier within the board meeting. There's a lot of engagement, lots of questions are being asked, lots of things being challenged. Um, then the lunch break, then the more mundane type of board thing, the CFO goes through the P&L review.
Hmm.
And it depends on the particular board meeting. In this particular case, whether she would be going through the just the consolidated P&L, or it would be broken down to the divisional and regional level. Sometimes she would touch on that, especially if there were particular things going on. But that's standard. That you'll see that some form of that in just about any kind of board meeting. Then
Okay.
back to the initiatives. At this particular point in time, an initiative had been added for IT. And keep in mind, this is before AI had hit. So we're talking about just more traditional IT, ERP system, et cetera. So the next one is the CFO also owned that initiative. So she made that presentation. And then the last one was the mergers and acquisitions initiative. And that person made that presentation. And the only other item on the agenda was an executive session, which we had every time the board met without management present,
Yeah.
usually very, very short unless there was some kind of major problem. Now, there might be other things that are on the agenda depending on what's going on. If there were legal issues that have risen to the level that the board needs to deal with it, then yeah, that's going to, it might not even appear on the agenda, but it's going to be brought forth by the CEO or the CFO or somebody. There
Hmm.
may be
Hmm.
other issues that are not legal issues, but are not tied to the initiatives. Something where and although it would be relevant to the overall value creation plan, and we had this fairly frequently, where new competition that were a major threat in a given market would show up out of nowhere, and we'd think through how we want to deal with that kind of thing. All of that does still fit within the context of the value creation plan. It's just not part of any particular initiative. So that's the core of what we would do at every board meeting. The core is the thing that we had all committed to, which is that value creation plan driven by these initiatives moving towards that 5-year target. It's so
Yeah.
much more simple. And I say simple, it's simple compared to public companies. Public companies, one of the problems with public company boards, among other things, is complexity. And
Mm.
the increase in complexity is an inverse relationship between complexity and efficacy and efficiency. And that's that's where public company boards find themselves now. But this really is it if you stop and think about the potential impact that can be had, it really is simple. It just requires a real concentrated effort to make it work. I mean, that's really you got to have the talent certainly, but the concentrated effort is is really probably the linchpin of the whole thing.
As you're talking then, I'm thinking, you mentioned it earlier, but Enron, I mean, the quality of the information that's coming up to the board has to be good, and you have to, or the board members have to kind of put a lot of faith in management that the quality of the information is good, and, what they're being told is correct, and that audited accounts are audited and all that kind of stuff. So
One point on the
it's,
information. One of the things that's unique about this, and I just in the essence of time, I didn't mention everything that's involved with it, but information flow. Now I'm not
mm,
suggesting this would have prevented Enron, because
No, 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 no.
anybody can do anything and fool a board. I don't care how good the board is and how tight the
Yes.
controls are. But one of the things that's a big complaint on the part of public company boards is the quality of the information that they're sent. And it's, for one, it's voluminous. Some board packs 400 pages long. That's just nuts. Our board package for this agenda might have been 20. Yeah, if that much.
Yeah.
But it's overall, it's as far as the flow of the information, it's the board who in this model, it's the board who's in charge and not management. It's the board who says and decides jointly, we need to see this, this, and this on this kind of schedule. And then it's not the board's job to develop it. It's just the board saying to management, this is what's essential to us to be able to do our job within the framework of where we're trying to take this company.
Mm,
Puts the board in charge and not management.
yeah. Okay. I think last sort of question really is around, and you might have already answered it earlier with this. I think you called it drift, but what's the kind of not most expensive, but what's the worst governance mistake you see boards make? Um, is there any kind of common theme there, or does it depend on the industry or the business itself?
The single biggest mistake is not understanding that a board can function as an asset. That's the single biggest mistake. So now you've got that context for putting together a board, and it's never going to be a board that performs at the highest level. There are all kind of other smaller level mistakes where, where the owner decides he's going to have a board, but then the board that he puts in place are all his friends and they don't challenge him. And it's all just an exercise in, the most exciting
Vanity.
part about it is the board dinner. I've seen that
Yeah,
with
yeah,
public
yeah.
company boards too, though, where the most exciting part was the board dinner. That's what they looked the most forward to.
Mm,
And I do not make
okay.
that up. One particular board, I remember hearing the directors just giddy over the place they were going to dinner and wishing that they could go to dinner there the next day instead of having the board meetings. And it's,
Terrible. Is that company still going?
um, yeah, in a whole different form. It got fixed. I can promise you
Maybe
that.
yeah, maybe it learned its lesson.
I was involved in fixing it.